We've got transfer talk, club politics to discuss, and the small matter of an FA Cup tie with Manchester United to get into on today's podcast. Delighted to say I've got a regular and brilliant guest alongside me to help navigate through a sea of divisive yet important topics. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. But first, a quick message from our partners. This video is brought to you by Stocks FC. Stocks FC is the football stock market where you can buy stocks in your favorite players and earn cash rewards based on their real-life performances. To get you started, they're giving away 5 free stocks to every user that signs up this month, offering you the chance to familiarize yourself with the platform. Buy stocks in young players you fancy to prove themselves and watch their stocks rise, or invest in those you see as solid performers who will maintain their value. Earn weekly dividend payments every time your players score goals, make assists and play key passes. Your free loan stocks are eligible for payouts for a month, so why not give it a go? To claim your 5 free loan stocks and begin your journey, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description. I'll be taking you along on my journey throughout our upcoming videos. Join me on the ride, Stocks FC. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, Harry Symeou. And I'm delighted to say that joining me on this very, very cold Friday morning, bright and early in North London, it's Mike Stavrou. Mike, welcome back to the show, mate. How are you? I can see you're wrapped up nice and warm too.
Yeah, I'm wrapped up, mate. I need to be. I've learned from my experience at the Emirates the other night, which was, it was a chilly one, mate. And I was sat in behind the goal, and everyone was stood up. So I think that helps slightly because I think when you're sat down, you tend to get a bit colder. You're not really moving around as much.
It's like they cut out
yeah.
the wind. The standing people seem to cut out the breeze, don't they?
Yeah. That was definitely helpful. But yeah, not if it was a win, it would have been worth it. But when you lose and you're cold and it's freezing, it's kind of like, oh, I wish I missed that one. But
do you feel like the reaction to the game the other night has been a little bit over the top? I mean, I have been saying for a few weeks now that I think we need reinforcement in attack. I've been worried about sort of the way that we're playing and, you know, the way our build-up has become a little bit too predictable, a little bit too slow at times. For me, this was a trigger point to kind of start pushing harder or campaigning harder. Not like what I say makes a difference, but to start beating that drum a little bit harder of the fact that I think we need reinforcement. But it wasn't just that game in isolation that brought me to this point. I think it's what we've seen throughout the campaign so far. Do you think that the reaction to Newcastle in isolation has been a little bit over the top, or can you understand why what's gone before that has influenced it?
yeah, I don't think it is in isolation, as you say. I think it's a build up of the whole season being a really big disappointment. I mean, maybe this is too negative to say, but I've been feeling for a while that I feel like we've actually regressed this season in terms of our style of football, but also the results. So I know when you look at the sort of points totals compared to last year, they're not too different, but that's because we went on this incredible run from this point onwards, really. And I don't see that happening this season because of injuries, because of the style of play. And you know, maybe that's too negative to say, but I just look at how we coped last season and how we were in our best moments versus how we've been this season, and I just really noticed a massive drop off, not only in terms of performance, but in terms of how we approach games. And you know, maybe sitting on leads too much. You know, obviously the early problem with the red cards at the beginning of the season. The injuries are obviously an external factor that we can't help, but you know, it's part of football. That's always going to happen. I think we've been lucky in recent seasons to keep the majority of our squad fit and our key players fit for most of it. But that's not been able to happen this season, and you've seen the results of it. So I think people are just feeling a little bit like we're getting to that stage of the season where Arsenal do what they normally do and go out of a lot of competitions in the space of a week, and it kind of feels like we're in the midst of that now, obviously because of the Carabao Cup game, and then it's United on the weekend, and then it's Spurs, which is a huge game, and Villa next week. So this feels like a really pivotal week in terms of big games and in terms of the ramifications on for the rest of the season. So I think that's why people are feeling a little bit like the pressure's on now.
Yeah, and you just don't feel that we've got what we need within our ranks to be able to rotate effectively, especially in certain positions. I mean, if you took our centre backs out, there's a massive drop off. We're obviously on our knees in terms of what we've got at right back because Jurriën Timber's literally the only option. I know Mikel Arteta has tended to use Thomas Partey in that position, but for me, that's not ideal. And it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle all season long. The factors that you mentioned are important. And I think you always have to make sure that when you analyze where Arsenal are at today, that context is applied. I don't think it's fair to ignore that stuff and the impact that stuff has. But equally, we've got to deal with it better. I think the issue for me, Mike, and correct me if I'm wrong, and we've got loads to get into today, guys, so bear with us because we've got transfer chat, we've got boardroom chat, we've got so much to get into on today's episode. But it feels to me like the problem in attack, although not necessarily obvious when you look at the last two seasons because of the volume of goals that we scored, but that lack of a cutting edge, that lack of an ability to be clinical when it really matters. It's not a new thing that fans are asking for. It's not a new thing that we've spotted and said, hold on, maybe we don't have quite enough of this. It's been ongoing for a while. And I don't know about you, but going into the summer just gone, I was certain that Arsenal were going to go out and get a striker or an attacker of some sort, a high value attacker. And what did they do? They waited until the end of the window. And on the last evening, they signed Raheem Sterling on a loan deal, which essentially cost the club next to nothing. Now, I don't know about you. I've got a lot of stick for saying this. So I'm really interested to get your take. But I do not for a second believe that was what Mikel Arteta had at the top of his want list going into that summer. That is a pivot to an emergency option because an opportunity became available. But that can't have been his first choice. If it was, he'd have been picking him. He'd have been playing him. He doesn't use him. The guy was on the bench the other night, and you can debate around how fit he was. But on multiple occasions this season, Mikel Arteta's been chasing a goal, and he's brought Zinchenko on before he's brought Raheem Sterling on. So that says to me that he don't believe he can help us. He didn't see him as the solution. He brought him in as a last gasp option because we had no other choice really at that point. So have the club failed Mikel Arteta? Because I see it that way.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting because I sent you something yesterday when we were talking about what we were going to do for this pod, and I think we need to look at it as a whole over the whole 5 years if you really want to assess the sort of the transfer activity. And obviously, Arteta is not the only person in this. Obviously, Edu and scouts and everything. But if we just look at the bare facts, the Athletic did a really good piece on this. So I'll read out to you the key parts. So in total, under Arteta, so obviously in the 5 years, he signed 30 players for a gross spend of £740 million. Of those 30, he signed 6 wingers and strikers. In comparison, 5 goalkeepers, 11 defenders, and 8 midfielders. So how that stacks up in terms of money spent. So it's 299 roughly on the first or defensive third, so goalkeeper and defenders, 275 million on the middle, and just 140 million on the final third. And also, crucially, that includes 65 million on Kai Havertz, who actually was signed as a midfielder. So you look at that, and it's clear as day what's been prioritized. What's been prioritized is the defense and the midfield. So obviously Arteta wanted to build his squad from the back forwards. So the attacking positions haven't seen that much investment. And we're seeing the evidence of that on the pitch. We're seeing that we are a defensive team first, and then we sort of worry about attack later. We're not built up to attack teams. That's not our prerogative. That's not our main focus. And for me, that is a problem, and that is the issue. So when we sort of zoom out a little bit and look at it as a whole, obviously our manager is prioritizing defense over attack, and yes, that has proved really important in terms of getting us competitive initially. And we had to, sort out this leaky team. We were called soft. We conceded stupid goals, individual errors. All of that has stopped really, but it just makes the margins really, really fine when you get to this stage, when you're at this elite level of wanting to get a 1-0 lead, maybe for a set piece, which is our main weapon at the moment, and then sitting on that, and you don't quite have the firepower to blow teams away as often as it feels like we have done in recent seasons.
Let me ask you this then. Let me play devil's advocate for a bit, because I agree with the fact that there's been priority taken in sort of building a defense and building a midfield, and the attack has been the kind of last thing, right? And that's why I was adamant that going into the summer, we were going to spend the bulk of our available funds on an attacker. And we didn't do that. Again, we reinforced the defense with Ricardo Calafiori. And again, we reinforced the midfield with Mikel Merino. Now, I think you can make arguments that those two players were necessary in the wider overall makeup of the squad. But we also sold for a lot of money in the summer. And we didn't really push the boat out in terms of our spend. When you look at what we spent versus what we brought in, there isn't that much difference, really. And that says to me that the spending, the investment has maybe slowed down a little bit. Now, I always said that that was going to happen at some point, but it shouldn't happen when you're right on the cusp. When you clearly need something, when you clearly need a bit of X factor, it shouldn't happen for me. But if I'm playing devil's advocate, Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli, two of our starting wide players, you would argue, definitely Saka. Martinelli has shared the role a little bit with Trossard over the last couple of years, but generally I'd say he's the number one pick. Those two were already at the club. So has that caused Mikel Arteta and the club to look and say, well, maybe that area is not one of priority necessarily, because when we inherited this team, we had those two players already. And actually, it was the other parts of the team that needed ripping out first. Had we not already had Saka and Martinelli, and we'd gone and spent big on two wingers to fill the positions that those two currently hold, then maybe that statistic or those numbers would look a little bit more balanced. So do we have to take that into consideration, at least when we're looking at those figures?
Yeah, look, yeah, especially Saka as well, because I think, even when we're going to talk about signings today, I think ultimately, I think it's kind of pointless spending a lot of money in that position, because you've got someone who is a world leading talent, and you're only bringing in players who could maybe take 10 minutes off him, or to rest him in the Carabao Cup, or a dead rubber game. So yeah, look, I agree with you on that. Martinelli, I think over the last 18 months, we've seen a bit of a regression there. And I think maybe that could have been an area where we signed someone. And look, like Trossard was brought in to take minutes off Martinelli. And while that has worked to an extent, they've sort of both been left in this position where neither's really good enough at the moment to provide what we need, because we've spoken about this before. And I've made this point before, that Kai Havertz is more of a facilitator than he is a finisher. So you need goals from the wing to make up for that deficit of him not being a clinical number 9. So look, I agree with your overall point, but and you're only really, if you look at it like that, taking out Saka, signing players for two positions, but they're key positions. Like that is where the difference is made. So when you take out, I said 140 million on final third, take out Havertz, because I don't really think you can count that. If I know he's played up front and that's his primary position now, but he was signed as a midfielder. So we're talking about transfers. You always have to consider it at the time of being made. What was the plan at the time? Yeah. Because that's the only information that you have to go off. Maybe he would have been seen as a versatile option, but if he's been signed for midfield, he's listed as a midfielder at the time. I just think you take away that 70 million odd in 5 years on a front three. It's just not enough. It's not enough.
I agree. I agree. It's not enough. And I agree that, that's definitely been the kind of shortcoming in terms of our transfer business, is that we haven't backed up that area of the pitch enough. We haven't built that area of the pitch enough to keep it fresh. We seem to go into the window every summer and prioritize other areas, while allowing that very, very important part of our team to just run stale a little bit. That's how I see it. I definitely agree. I do want to talk about what's going on upstairs at the football club. We're going to do that now, because I think that's a really, really big discussion. So it's not been that long since we learned that Edu was leaving the club. Myself and you, I think, Mike, jumped on a pod that day when that news broke. I'm pretty sure we did. And we talked about it. We talked about, his departure, the fact that he was going to join Evangelos Marinakis' group, which we were both a bit like, what? Like, okay, you're going to get to be a CEO, but you're going to be overseeing clubs that are nowhere near the size of Arsenal, and therefore, does it have the same appeal? Clearly, to Edu, it does. Clearly, financially, they've made it worth his while. And of course, he has gone. Now, before we get into who might replace Edu, I do want to address a report that Duncan Castles put out yesterday. I think he was speaking on a podcast, and I think the quote has been taken from there. Duncan Castles, pretty good when it comes to sort of transfer related stuff normally. But he had this to say. Mikel Arteta went into this season in his strongest position of power ever at Arsenal, having been handed a new 3-year contract in September. That contract, I'm told, was one of the key reasons why Edu resigned as sporting director. He wasn't happy with Arteta's increasing authority at the club. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's really interesting because it's always funny when these power balances are going on within a club, and obviously it's a really weird phenomenon. If I can say it, it's 9 o'clock. It's early. It's a really interesting thing because the sort of sporting directors at clubs have become almost like celebrities. So 10 years ago, if we were doing this podcast, we wouldn't be talking about Edu. We wouldn't be saying, "Oh, he signed this player. Edu's cooking," all of this sort of stuff. It just wouldn't
Memes
be
of him
in our
barbecuing. None of that would happen.
yeah, like that. That wouldn't be like anywhere near our thoughts. Maybe when you're talking about power battles, it's more about the owner and the manager. But the sporting director has taken on a really interesting sort of place in the media landscape, at least, and within fan conversations as well. Obviously, as we're having it here. But in terms of Arteta, it's kind of interesting just to go into the power dynamic conversation because I listened to David Ornstein's interview with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, which he did on the Athletic the other day. I had the joy of sort of editing that and pulling some clips out for the podcast we did on it the other day. And when he was talking about his relationship with Arteta, it really reminded me of that period when he was really laying down the law, and I've kind of forgotten about that because of all the good things that have come after that. But at the time, it was a huge thing, dropping your captain after he was late for the North London derby. There was the whole situation with when Aubameyang had a trip to do with his mum when she was ill, and then that led to obviously a situation with COVID regulations and all of that, and then ultimately this all led to him being stripped of the captaincy. And I kind of forgotten how many players like that and big personalities that Arteta won the battle with and ultimately proved his power, that it was kind of going to be, moving forward his club. He obviously went from head coach initially to being manager. That was a big switch in terms of authority. And it kind of, because the results on the pitch have been so good, we've kind of almost forgotten that we've been through all of that turmoil in the past. So when Edu's talking about his growing power, I guess it just kind of reminded me of, this does feel like, Mikel Arteta FC. And we can discuss, me and you, whether that's a good thing or not. I think he's earned it in a way because of where he's taken the club from to where we are now. But going forward, in terms of, does Edu leaving lead to him having more power in terms of recruitment? Is that a good thing? Does that distract from maybe his coaching? Does that give him a bit too much power in terms of all of the players that he's going to suggest? No one's going to really be able to say no, especially if it's Jason Ayto, as we're going to talk about, coming into that role, being promoted from within. Does that give him maybe a bit less say than Edu would have? I don't know. These are all interesting questions that we can discuss, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not surprising to read that because I do think that something must have happened. Like for Edu to just up and leave before he's achieved what he set out to achieve suggests to me that something wasn't quite right at Arsenal for him. Now, I'm not saying that, there isn't a world where somebody comes in and makes a mega money offer that turns the head of anybody, right? That can happen. But when I think about where he's going and who he's going to, it says to me that for him to accept that, he must have been unhappy at Arsenal prior to us learning of it. There must have been something going on in the background. And this thing about Mikel Arteta having like loads and loads of power, on the one hand, I quite like it because he's a football guy. And I'd rather a football guy had the power than an accountant, if that makes sense, right? So I understand that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're the same set of fans that going back a few years were bemoaning the fact that Arsene Wenger had all the power. We're the same set of fans that said it was impossible in the modern game for one man to have so much control and so much responsibility. Because, first of all, it's not even about whether you trust their decisions or whether you think they're going to lead you down the wrong path. No one individual can possibly spread himself that thinly across a load of things and do each and every one of those roles to a top standard. It is physically and mentally impossible. I honestly do believe that. I'd rather have someone who knows football at the top of the tree, calling the shots, etc., etc. But everybody needs someone to sanity check things with. And when Edu was there, I felt like Edu had the authority, but also had the sort of weight with the fans to be able to push back on stuff with Mikel Arteta and push back at him and say, okay, for instance, and we do believe, by the way, that one of the big disagreements that the two had in the back end of his Arsenal tenure was around the signing of Mikel Merino. Now, it was never specified that it was Edu that had a problem with it, but it was said, it was reported, I think, by The Athletic that some of the club's hierarchy were not completely sold on the idea of Arsenal bringing in Mikel Merino. Now, let's say, for instance, that it's Edu. Because, and the reason I attribute that to Edu, and again, it's not fact, but it's my opinion, is because he came out, didn't he, not that long ago and said, look, when a player's 28, 29, I've got to do some serious thinking about whether or not they're worth getting that type of contract, whether they're worth me going and spending a chunk of what we have available, etc., etc. And then lo and behold, Mikel Merino comes in and Edu's gone. So, I don't know for sure that there's a correlation between those two things, but it feels like Edu would have, in theory, based on what we know, have been the one to push back. Now, if you put Jason Ayto in that role, and it's a kind of nice segue onto talking about him, does that guy have the authority to push back at Mikel Arteta to the point where he can veto a transfer? Because one of the things that Arteta and Edu seemed to do so well was work like on a similar level. They never agreed on everything. Nobody does. And we know that because Edu in the documentary spoke about his initial feelings when Arteta came to him and said, we got to get rid of Aubameyang. He was a bit like, hold on a minute. Like, this is our captain. We've just given him this bumper contract. What are we doing here? I just worry that if you put someone like Jason Ayto in place, who I don't know anything about, by the way, so this is no slight on him. It just feels like it's not a powerful enough figure based on what we know to keep Mikel Arteta in check. And you need to keep your manager in check because you need to make sure that there is sanity checks taking place with each and every decision you make. That doesn't mean that you're going to be difficult and say no to everything that the manager proposes, but you need that extra line of sort of protection of thinking. And I don't know. I don't know that this is going to work. I mean, I do feel Edu left for reasons that we're probably not aware of just yet, and maybe we will be one day. But the Jason Ayto thing as a sort of a replacement, it feels like it's a club man. It's a guy that they already sort of believe in and trust in. And I'm all for promotion from within, but it feels like this is the easy option and an option that is going to challenge Mikel Arteta and maybe KSE when they turn around and say, nope, there's nothing to spend. I think he's going to challenge them a lot less than an established sporting director would.
And look, let's not forget. Now we are so aware, like I was saying earlier, of sporting directors and how they've almost become celebrity. If you look at the sort of successful teams of the last 10 years in the Premier League, you've always seen fruitful working relationships between sporting director, manager, and ownership. If you look at Liverpool, it's FSG, Michael Edwards, and Jurgen Klopp. They had that relationship where, they got these amazing deals done. They built a title winning team, a Champions League winning team. Like, if you look at some of the business, it was phenomenal, really. Selling Philippe Coutinho to then be able to buy Alisson and Virgil van Dijk. Like, that's self-sustainable, that's smart. Sadio Mane for good money. Mohamed Salah for good money. Like, these are really smart moves. Also, City, I know it's a different situation. They have a lot more money, but that relationship between Cheeky Begiristain and Pep Guardiola, obviously very fruitful.
Yep.
So it's different at Arsenal because the two men in their positions weren't as established as those two I've just mentioned. Obviously, Edu had time with Corinthians and had time with Brazil and had a great playing career. But as a sort of sporting director of a big European club, that hadn't happened. And then you look at Arteta, and obviously that was his first managerial job. So what they've kind of done is grown together, and they've sort of, they've learned on the job, let's say, in terms of a really, really big club, and they've built up their profiles to a point where they're being desired by other clubs. I'm sure Arteta, who has built himself up to be one of the best managers in the league, would have loads of suitors, you know, as a manager, and Edu as well. And clearly that's why he's gone to the Marinakis group. So I think Edu didn't start having that sort of authority that he does now, but he obviously built that by the end, and it was all about that relationship between the two. And I completely agree with you. Like, you need to check that power that Arteta has, and any manager has, as a club that big, needs to be checked. You need to have someone to bounce off, but someone who's on sort of equal footing as you. And, no disrespect to Jason Ayto, but is he on an equal footing as Mikel Arteta? Like, the answer has to be no. So that would worry me. I mean, look, the alternative, one of the other names that has been bandied about is Tomas Rosicky. And are we just looking at and saying, oh, because we loved him as a player, that he's going to be, a really good sporting director because he has that player background as well? I mean, I'll ask you, Harry, do you know how much success he's had at Sparta Prague? Like, we're only going off that as fans, as a name, aren't we, really, at this stage?
Yeah. From what I read, and it is just from what I read, I don't watch Sparta Prague every week. I'd be lying if I said I did. And I haven't followed their journey particularly well. But from what I read, he has done a lot in terms of helping them turn themselves around and getting themselves to a point where they're Czech champions. And I think they're on course to win it again this time around. But like, Sparta Prague, for me, growing up, have always been the biggest club in the Czech Republic. So it's not, I don't look at it and say, oh my God, that is an unreal achievement. Like, Sparta Prague are going back to where they should be. Now, yes, Rosicky deserves some credit for that, some praise for that. But I do agree with you. Nostalgia is what will make a lot of fans feel that this is the right move. Now, does he have the authority to challenge Mikel Arteta? An ex-player adored by the sort of supporters as well. And maybe that puts him in a similar position to Edu when you compare it to maybe the position that Jason Ayto would be in. He'd probably have more goodwill with the fans. And if he comes out and does what Edu did, which was speak really well at times, make himself very open and approachable. That's one of the things with Edu, right? I thought Edu was a great connection between the club and the fans. He was almost like an ambassador as well as a sporting director. I know I mentioned it before on the pod, and I'm not trying to name drop, but I have interviewed him twice, and both times I found him incredibly warm. I found him to be willing to speak to me. Like, he was willing to give up the time. You get a lot of people that are in those types of positions and they're in a rush and they want to get away. And this was one of them was on a red carpet, right? So he had every right to just walk past, and he didn't. He stopped and he spoke, and he spoke really, really well. And I always felt that kind of loyalty to Edu for that reason. And so when he made decisions that I would say are questionable, I would offer him more support maybe than I would someone else, because I thought he was a great conduit between us and the club. I don't know that I'm going to get that with Jason Ayto. With Jason Ayto, and it's very hard to justify and to quantify what a good sporting director is, because what are you looking at? Transfers, sales, contract negotiations. Those are the kind of the three tangibles. But everything else, you wouldn't know anything about. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Edu, there was a bit more. There was a bit extra. There was that connection with the fans that gave him that goodwill that we all kind of were looking for, that got us on side and got us on board. And then you add that he knows the club and all of that. I don't think that's the be all and end all, by the way. I think if you're good at your job, you will come in, you will find your feet, and you will do fine. Does it help if you know the history of the club and maybe have those relationships already? Yeah, I think it does. I'd rather Tomas Rosicky than Jason Ayto, put it that way. But, again, it's very, very hard to sit here and say one will be a success and one won't. Sammy Mockbell reported yesterday that there's growing support internally for Jason Ayto to be the permanent successor. Did mention Tomas Rosicky as well, but as I say, we don't have a clue really, do we? What's going on?
Yeah. No, and look, just ask yourself this: like, if you were Mikel Arteta, you've been at Arsenal for 5 years, you've established yourself, you've become a top manager, you challenge for the title. What sort of character would you want coming in? Like, because if that was me, I'm putting myself in Arteta's shoes. Do I want someone who's going to come in and really challenge my authority? And if we're talking about, Edu being on a similar sort of footing to him, say, I don't know, probably the most high profile sport director out there is probably Monchi, right? Would you, if you were Mikel Arteta, would you want Monchi to come in and challenge your power and challenge the way you do things, which would probably happen because he's got that, that footing in football? Or would you want someone internal who you've worked with, you know them, they know the club, or would you want that? So, to me, it's an easy answer, right? Like, if he wants to maintain power and if he wants to have more of a say and doesn't want his power to be challenged, then you go for Jason Ayto if it's up to him. But ultimately, I don't think it's up to him. Well, I don't imagine. I imagine he'd have a say, but I don't imagine the final decision is down to him. But just looking at it from his perspective, it's clear which option he'd choose, right?
Yeah, it feels like I'll look at it. I'll summarize it this way. Like, this is how I see it. I think the club would probably prioritize Jason Ayto because they have clearly seen enough from him when he was working with Edu to understand that he would be loyal. Also, promoting him to a position that he probably on paper has no right to have. Because, like, he's been an assistant sporting director, fine, but there are people out there, other candidates that have been sporting directors at even bigger clubs than Arsenal that would probably be more qualified for the role. So when you give someone a role that they're not necessarily the most well qualified to have, what you're doing is you're buying their loyalty. I really do believe that. So then you put Jason Ayto in this position where he probably doesn't want to challenge the club's ownership or the club's hierarchy in the same way because he feels like he owes them now. They didn't come out and search the sort of the world and find someone and move heaven and earth to bring him in. That's not what's happened here. Promotion from within earns you loyalty. And that's what they're going to get out of Jason Ayto, I think. Getting someone from an external club is probably going to be a little bit more challenging and push you back. So I think the club would prefer that promotion happens internally. On Mikel Arteta's side of things, if he is the guy that he says he is, where he wants people around him that are going to challenge him, that are going to make him think, blah, 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 then show us that now and push for a sporting director that is going to be powerful, that is going to be strong, and that is going to be aligned with you as much as is necessary to make sure that you're pulling in the same direction generally, but that is going to question what you do, that is going to sanity check your stuff. If you are going to want and I don't mean this disrespectfully to Jason Ayto, but if you're going to want the puppet sporting director, then you aren't who you say you are. And you're going to end up being looked at in the same way that Arsene Wenger was at the end of his tenure, and I don't ever believe this was the case with Arsene, by the way. I always think his intentions were right. But you're going to be looked at as the power-hungry guy that essentially prevented himself from progressing because he was too stubborn to let somebody else in. And that's where I think Arteta's at a bit of a crossroads with this. And I agree with you. It's not his decision solely. It will come down to a lot of factors. But if I were him, I'd be pushing for the right candidate rather than the one that is going to give me the less aggro and the one that's going to give me the least sort of challenging questions. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing. It's a really interesting thing. Right. We're going to take a short pause. And when we come back, we've got some serious transfer chat to get into. I know everybody loves a bit of that. Before we continue, just a quick reminder that the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast is partnered with NordVPN. It's the best VPN service out there, and it's a service that I personally can't do without anymore. Whether you're looking to stream your favorite movies or the sport, NordVPN is the one for you. It is a game changer, and you can sign up via the link in the description. Visit nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC for a mega discount and 4 months free at the end of your plan. Not only does it give you extra protection when surfing the web, downloading or streaming, but I now have the ability to access geo-block content by changing my location virtually with just the click of a button. Sign up now via nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC and take advantage of this amazing offer. Plus, with their 30-day money-back guarantee, it's totally risk-free and you won't regret it. nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC. Sign up now. You won't regret it. And we thank them, of course, for their amazing support of the pod. Right then, Michael, let's get into some transfer chat because there's a fair bit sort of going around at the moment. Let's start off with a player that I think has been on Arsenal's radar for a fair amount of time, and certainly on the fans' radar, Nico Williams. Now, we heard from David Ornstein a few days ago that Mikel Arteta would love to sign Nico Williams in this January window, but that wages are a problem. Where do you stand on A, Nico Williams' suitability to Arsenal, and B, this apparent issue with his salary and what that means for us in terms of being able to do the deal or not?
Yeah, I don't think it's just salary. It's the release clause as well. Obviously, the nature of that, 60 million euros. So on the face of it, it's not extortionate. It's not like Neymar's release clause at Barcelona or anything like that. But because of the PSR situation right now, it's difficult because you have to pay it in full. That's the difficult thing with release clauses. That I think that makes it really tricky to do a deal, especially in January. So I think that plus the wages makes it tough. In terms of Nico Williams's suitability, I love him as a player. I really think he's really, really exciting. Super pacey, really technically sound. Is obviously a player for the big moments. He seems like that. He seems like he's really ready for a big step up to a huge club. It's done really well at Bilbao, obviously. But for me, and we've spoken about this before, I kind of think we need a bit more of a goal scorer from the left hand side. I'm not sure that's really Nico Williams's strong point. I think he's a great sort of touchline winger, really good one-on-one, great dribbler. But in terms of someone who's going to really provide Saka level output, which is what we need from that left-hand side, I'm not 100% he's the one for that. I mean, he's a fantastic player, and obviously, Arteta wants him. So who am I to sort of say Arteta's wrong? But yeah, obviously you'd take him. Whether he's the perfect fit, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because if you'd have asked me directly after the European Championships, I'd have been all over this. I'd have even said, yes, definitely go and do it, because I was blown away by some of his performances. I saw him live, I think, twice during the Euros, one of them being the final, and I thought he was unreal. Really strong runner, really intelligent in his movement, very direct, great dribbling ability, etc., etc. And he seemed to have a cutting edge that I wasn't sure that Nico Williams had. He seemed to show a quality in the final third that I felt in the past was maybe missing when I'd watch him play for Athletic Bilbao. And, he proved me wrong in the Euros, but then he hasn't exactly followed that up with the best season so far. And I don't know how much of that I can allow him to get away with on the basis of it's a Euros hangover. Like, I know we've seen some of our players struggle to kind of get back into form after that tournament. So I recognize that it's a thing, but how much can I attribute that to? Like, is it 50% of the reason? Is it 40% of the reason? Is it 70% of the reason? I don't know. His release clause is obviously one of those La Liga release clauses where you have to go and deposit the full amount to get it done. And obviously, I don't envisage Arsenal doing that in this January window, which I think is ridiculous, by the way, because reading Swiss Ramble's financial breakdown the other day, we're nowhere near the red line when it comes to PSR. So the only reason, as far as I can see, and I might be wrong, but the only reason I can see that Arsenal don't do that is because they don't want to. And that frustrates the life out of me. Like, you either look at Nico Williams and you say, long-term target for a good reason. Okay, he's having a bit of a difficult time right now in comparison to where he's been, but, he's good enough and the quality will come through. Let's go and do it. Or you move on to someone else. But this idea that, his salary is a big problem, I'm sure it is, because it's not just what you pay him, right? It's what that does for the rest of the squad. Like you bring him in on, let's say, 300K a week, and then all of a sudden other players start piping up and saying, hold on a minute, if Nico Williams is on 300K a week, why aren't I on 300K a week? And it can do you damage in terms of your negotiations with others. So I get all of that. But the release clause shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem at all. Like Arsenal should be able to afford that kind of money. Is that not fair to say?
Well, they should be, but I mean, maybe they're thinking about it from a sort of squad perspective. And like you said, I think that salary thing is interesting because we've raised the sort of the ceiling and the floor of our salary base a lot over the
Yeah.
past couple of years, because we had that period where we got rid of all of the high earners, Aubameyang, Mesut Ozil. They were gone. So we had that period where we had like a really young squad, and you know, Bukayo Saka wouldn't have been on a lot of money when he was you know, younger. But now we've got to a point where we're paying these players a lot of money. So when you bring in a player like that, they're going to also look at what the others are on and say, okay, I want that as well. I want parity with what these other players in the squad are being paid. I mean, when you're talking about 60 million, we just going by recent history, we don't do that sort of business in January. And so that's what would make me think this is not going to happen now. And even though it is a player we like, so technically, does it really matter if you do it in January or you do it in the summer? I'm not sure. We don't splash out that money in January. It just doesn't historically happen. So that's why I can't really see it with Nico Williams, even though it would be exciting.
Yeah, it's one of those where like you want it to happen, but you're also like realistic about where Arsenal are at, and it just doesn't look likely. And all the reporting suggests that it's not likely as well. So maybe we shouldn't get our hopes up on this one. Let's move on to another player that I know a lot of Arsenal fans would love to see come into the club, Alexander Isak. Where do you stand on this, first of all, before we get into the viability of this deal? Is it one that you look at and say, pay anything? Because that's where I'm at on Alexander Isak right now.
I love Isak, mate. I like it. Like it just showed it the other night. You know, he took his chance when we had so many and couldn't. And you know, specifically Kai Havertz missed that huge chance. I don't even know how he did that. Really, how he missed that. I've not even been able to bring myself to watch the highlights, but because I was on that end of the stadium, I saw what he did, so I don't need to watch it again. It was bad enough. It was bad enough the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Isak because of that reason. I think, you know, he's versatile. Obviously, he would probably play as a number 9 for us, but he's got the ability to play off the left as well. So if you wanted to attack some games with Havertz and Isak as a sort of like an inside forward, he'd be more than you know, good enough to do that. And he's just a different type of profile. He's not the target man. He's more of an advanced forward. So good with his back to goal as well, which was quite rare for a player who's not really big and strong. But he's really smart in how he uses his body, and his technical level is, I want to say, probably one of the best in terms of strikers across Europe. Like, you don't really see strikers that have got the frame, but then have got the ability with both feet as well, and dribbling ability as well. I think he's just like a really unique top player. And maybe because I know a lot of people were looking back to when we were linked with him in Jan 22, I think, when there was talk about us going for him, and there was the 70 million release clause from Sociedad. I don't quite think he's the same player then as he is now. I think he's really kicked on at Newcastle, and I think he's been able to do that because he's been growing with them as well. Because obviously, you know, we're at I'd like to think we're at a much higher level than them. Maybe it doesn't show from the game the other day, but he's been able to grow with them and have time to develop. He's been sort of battling back and forth with Callum Wilson over the years. So he's had that space and an ability to grow, whereas he probably wouldn't have got that with us, because if we drop 70 million on him, we don't go and sign Kai Havertz, and he's our main striker. If he didn't perform, you know, at the levels that he is now back then, maybe he doesn't get to be the same player that he is today. But for me, like, in terms of value, if they had, I don't know, what would Newcastle want? 120 million, 130 million. I think if you're looking for the jewel in the crown and that final piece of the puzzle, like we're saying here, we've spent so much on defensive midfield. if there's one striker you go for to, really finish this thing off, I think it's him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you pay £105 million for Declan Rice, there's no real sort of leg to stand on if you're going to then sit there and say, no, I'm not paying 120 for Alexander Isak, because I always use this phrase, but goals are the most valuable commodity in football, and Alexander Isak will bring you those. And for me, he's obviously very, very physical as well, which I like, and I think you need in this league. But it's the flair for me. It's the technical ability. It's that throwback old school flair that I think at times has maybe been coached out of the game. I do wonder, and I'll just throw this out there, and I don't know this for a fact, obviously. This is me speculating. It's something that's just literally popped into my head now. Do you think that will put Mikel Arteta off? The fact that he's unpredictable, the fact that he's got so much flair, because this is a manager, Mike, who wants everything to work like clockwork. He's very, very pragmatic at times. Is that me being unfair to Mikel Arteta? I mean, he did make some quite suggestive comments the other day about Isak to say, like, he's a top player and all the rest of it. But I just, is there room in Mikel Arteta's Arsenal for these off the cuff, flair, creative types?
I think if you're doing the business and you're scoring the goals, I don't really think it matters. If you try and flicks and tricks and it's not quite working and that's leading to you not scoring or assisting, then I would say that's probably not what Arteta wants. But if you're offering, Mikel Arteta an extra 15 goals a season, he's not going to say no to that because Isak, dribbles past a few players or does something like that. If you ask him, probably is that what he wants in a player? Just judging by how he's coached us and what he likes in a player, I'd probably say no. But then again, like, I think that element of him and that unpredictability is almost what makes him special.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want to take that away. But look, I don't think Arteta would have a problem with it because he does the business. But he obviously is not a manager for flicks and tricks and flair in that sense, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I want to move on to another player. I want to talk Kvicha Kvaratskhelia. Now, I remember me and you did a pod a little while ago. I think it was going into the January window or maybe a slightly earlier. And I said to you that if there was one player I'd go and get, it would be Kvaratskhelia. And it's come to light that Napoli would be willing if the price was met. And I think it's around about, 65 million euros is being reported. It's come to light that Napoli would be actually open to doing a deal at that type of money. Now, to give you a bit of background and a bit of context around the Napoli situation, they've obviously got Antonio Conte in the summer. Antonio Conte has very specific wants and needs, and they have had to pander to those needs to the point where they allowed Victor Osimhen to go out on loan for the season because Antonio Conte just didn't want him. They were really steadfast in their sort of asking price for Osimhen, which meant no one was forthcoming with an offer, and off he went to Galatasaray. Kvaratskhelia is not an Antonio Conte type player, in my opinion.
At all.
Yeah, we were just talking about flair. We were talking about unpredictability, that kind of old school maverick type. That's what Kvaratskhelia is. Again, I'd have questions around whether Mikel Arteta would see him as a good fit, but I see him as a great fit. I'd love us to go out and get him. He's just 23 years old as well, which I think goes under the radar a little bit because he's been on the scene for a good 3 seasons now, playing at a really high level. And then we learned yesterday that Liverpool are keeping tabs on his situation, and that comes from the very reliable David Ornstein. I've got to be honest, and excuse my language, but that pissed me right off because I want Kvaratskhelia. He's an Arsenal player. He should be at the carpet. And if there's an opportunity to get him for that sort of money and we turn our noses up at it and do not push, do not even try, and he goes to Liverpool in a deal like that, I will be devastated and it would be a massive opportunity missed. It's not often that I go massive on players and say, this is the guy. Alexander Isak is one, Kvaratskhelia is the other. Those two are exactly what Arsenal are missing in terms of flair, creativity, football intelligence. They're everything that we need. And this is one of them on the market for a very, very reasonable price, yet we don't seem to want to do it.
Isn't that a really interesting comparison when we're talking about squad building and money spent in different areas? Just talking about Liverpool adding another forward to what is already a stacked front line. Like they've
That's a
got
good point.
Salah, Nunez, Gakpo, Diaz, Jota. Like they can't fit all of their great attackers in one team, so they just rotate them. And it's a really interesting comparison that they want to go and add Kvaratskhelia to that. And for me, look, like he probably goes against what I was saying earlier in that he's not a goal scoring winger per se, but like just looking at the stats from this season, they're quite interesting because like in terms of Serie A, 17 matches, 5 goals, 3 assists. But then you look at the sort of metrics beyond that, and I had a little look on FBref and versus wingers and attacking mid, in the last 365 days across top 5 European leagues. He's the top 1% in terms of total shots, takes a 3.95 per 90, top 9% in terms of progressive carries, and the top 15% successful take on. So this is a player who essentially likes to front you up, beat you with a bit of skill, and then take a shot. Like that's what he is. As you say, he's an old school maverick. And in terms of XJ, which something just made up, expected joy, he's through the roof. Like
Oh,
I
was going to say, where's that come from? I love it.
I made up and I think we need a bit of joy, like because this season has been. Let me ask you: have you enjoyed the football this season? Like straight answer, yes or no.
Not really, in spells, but generally, I'd say no.
It's not the free flowing style that we've seen before. In not every game, but in moments. So I just think we need a bit of joy. We need a bit of excitement. I think players like Kvaratskhelia bring that. Again, the question that we always go back to: does Mikel Arteta want that? Does he want the trickster ability? Does he want the flair? I don't think so.
No, I agree. And you've just given me the title of the podcast there, Expected Joy. Brilliant stuff. Love it. Right. Let's get into some more transfer talk. Just before we do that, though, I just want to remind you guys that this YouTube video is in partnership with Stocks FC. I'm just going to share my screen with you guys to give you a little look at what you can do on Stocks FC and share with you guys my portfolio. So, of course, if you sign up using our code, you can scan the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You'll be able to claim free loan stocks, 5 free loan stocks that you can play with and you can essentially use to earn dividends out of over the course of the next month. So do check it out. You can top up as you wish. You don't have to put a load in. Let me be very, very clear. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a bit of fun. And it's an opportunity to have a little bit of an investment in some of the players that you believe are on an upward trajectory. Or if you want to be safer, like I am in some ways, you put it on players that you think are going to be solid performers. Therefore, they're going to maintain their value and maintain the value of your overall portfolio. I showed you guys who I've got the other day. I got a couple of loans, Winks and Son. They were given to me. You can see that their prices are there on the right-hand side of the screen. Son's at $1.54. Bernardo Silva has brought me some profit because his value is going up. And I think that's a great one to be on because Manchester City, I'm expecting to go on a really good run now and start to look much more like the usual selves. He'll be a key part of that. And then you've got players whose values are up and down. Kai Havertz is a little bit down at the moment. Ben White, I've invested in now while it's low because I know that when he comes back, that is going to shoot up through the roof. So that gives you an inkling of how you play. It's a bit of fun. As I say, only put in what you can afford. But it's great fun, Stocks FC, and I'll keep you across my journey with it throughout our upcoming videos, of course. Right, let's get back then to some transfer chat, and let's turn our attentions to Omar Marmoush. Now, this is a player, Mike, that you brought up, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last time we discussed transfers. All the noises that we were hearing out of Germany when Arsenal were being linked were not for sale. Eintracht Frankfurt have no need to get rid of this player right now. Isn't going to happen. Might happen in the summer, but for now he's staying put. And then Manchester City come along and start knocking on the door and have obviously turned the player's head. the last time I looked into this, and we are pre-recording this episode, there wasn't a deal in place with Eintracht Frankfurt yet, but it seems like there's one very close between the player and Manchester City. Would this be for you, the Kvaratskhelia, the one that we should go for, that we're obviously at the moment looking like we're prepared to just sit and allow to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think this one, and the reason I mentioned it was because at that time when we were talking about targets, again, like I've got very specific sort of idea in mind of what sort of player I'd like, and it's someone who's versatile that can play through the middle or through the left, and as a goal scorer. And the reason I brought Marmoush up was because his numbers were incredible. And 15 matches in the Bundesliga, 13 goals, 7 assists, like that's insane numbers. And obviously the big discussion is, can he replicate that in the Premier League? It's a question mark. And also the consistency. He's not been doing this for a long time. He's having a breakout season. And he's not doing it at the very highest level, let's say. So it's a difficult one to say whether we can extrapolate that and whether he performed in the Premier League. But obviously, if Man City are looking at him, they're obviously quite convinced. So that again reinforces my own sort of opinion that he would be a good fit.
Yeah, they've bought a few decent players over the years, haven't they?
They have not all hits, like some misses as well, of course, but they've got a pretty good record. So yeah, look, again, with this added element, it would probably be even harder for Arsenal if they wanted to do a deal to go and do that now that Man City are interested. But it's the kind of market opportunity that you really think Arsenal should be taking advantage of. And it's disappointing, really, that they're not. But maybe that sort of goes for, and like I said, like they do have a bit of a safety first approach in January. And I don't really know what the reason for that is. Arteta clearly wants to add an attacker, otherwise we wouldn't be interested in Nico Williams. So it's like, with him, is it either his top target or no one? And that's kind of what the feeling that I get. And maybe that's why we ended up getting Raheem Sterling. Maybe there was a target that he had in mind that was top. They didn't get him, and then they ended up going for someone like a market opportunity like Sterling.
How long can you wait though? I get waiting from a January to a summer. I get that. Okay, I completely understand that. And if you told me today, either we get a sort of second-rate striker now, or we go for a top-rate striker in the summer, I'm picking wait till the summer. I completely understand that viewpoint. No problem. But this has been something we've been waiting for maybe 2-3 seasons now. And that's where the frustration starts to kick in, I think. Just back to Marmoush, I look at him on FB Ref, and again, it's not a player I've watched a great deal of. I'd be lying if I said I had. But just looking at some of his sort of basic sort of stats on FB Ref and sort of looking at the percentiles which he falls in and stuff, he feels like he has a lot of the attributes that we're missing and we're looking for, but also a lot of the ones that Mikel Arteta really values and manages to extract from the players he has now. So he's in the 98th percentile for assists, for instance. He's in the 99th percentile for shot creating actions. These are things that I think we're missing. Assist is obviously what he looks for, Arteta, in a striker as well. Successful take-ons, 97th percentile. That's something that we don't have enough of, I don't think, in the final third. Progressive carries, 95th percentile. So in Omar Marmoush, when I do like a sort of top-level analysis of what he's good at, I can see things that we need, and I can see things that we already have, which is a good thing because then it means that he fits in Arteta's game model. So I think this one would make a lot of sense. But again, have I got much hope of it happening? Not really. And that's the sad thing, I guess. Anything you want to say to wrap up? We've been going for the best part of an hour. How are you feeling about Man United at the weekend?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of, as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of scared because when it comes to Arsenal, as I said, at this time of the year, it kind of seems to unravel sometimes, especially with the cup competitions. Like we always seem to go out of them all at once. Like it's happened so many times under Arteta, and that's why I was kind of surprised at the lineup the other day against Newcastle. I thought we'd rotate a bit more, especially with this game against Man United in mind.
Would you argue though, Mike,
so
that
disappointing.
would you argue that Man United is more of a rotatable game, looking at the way they are at the minute versus Newcastle? You think he looked at it that way?
Probably. And also, look, one's a semi-final, one's third round. If you go out in the third round, obviously it's going to be disappointment. But if you go out in the semi-finals when you're so close, it's a bigger thing, which it does look like happening. But look, I'm not worried about facing Man United. I'm more worried about us at the moment. I think, people are asking me like, "Oh, do you think we're going to win the Premier League?" And I don't even want to focus on Liverpool and whether they could slip up, because for me, we're not consistent enough to keep getting those results. And as we said, multiple factors in that, injuries. But ultimately, in terms of consistency of performances, we're just not quite there. So that's why I'm still worried when we go into every game. Like, what Arsenal are we going to see? Like, what we're going to look like? And if Man United produce a performance like they did against Liverpool, I think we could be in a bit of trouble, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's going to be an interesting game. I think if we could beat Manchester United and then follow that up with a North London derby win in midweek, I can tell you the mood around the club will be far more positive.
Yeah.
And I think that would help quell some of the January talk. Like, I think in a January window where the general consensus is that we need signings or a signing, I think that you're always going to have this discourse in the background. And the more you can do on the pitch, the less that comes through. And so I think if we go and beat Manchester United and we go and beat Tottenham Hotspur, then all of a sudden the mood is much more positive and the transfer stuff becomes less of a talking point. But when you're seeing the team struggle, that is always going to come to the forefront. That is always going to dominate conversations. And that is going to shape the narrative around Arsenal. And that's where we're at today. So we need these results, in my opinion, to try and help with that. Michael, thank you very, very much, as always, for your time. Hugely appreciated. Let people know where they can follow you and how they can check out the brilliant work that you're involved in.
Yeah, so Blue Sky, I'm not using it too much, but I'm still on there trying to sort of still test it out, because I'm not sure really where we're in a weird space with social media now, because so many people have left Twitter. But Blue Sky, I'm Mike _Stavrou. But if you want to sort of follow my work on The Athletic, I work on the Athletic FC podcast and the Tactics podcast as well. So go check them out.
Brilliant stuff. They're fantastic podcasts, far more upmarket than this. So go over and check those out. Michael, thank you very, very much. I sound like your mum. I keep calling you Michael. I don't know why. It's become a habit now. We'll see you all on the next pod. Next episode will be with you guys on Saturday morning. We'll bring you a comprehensive preview of the game against Manchester United, and we'll touch on and cover any other stories that surface in the interim. But until then, take care of yourselves. Have a great Friday. All the best, and up the Arsenal.